It's a story so strange, it could have been plucked from the pages of her own novels.
Have forgotten about the biggest mystery in Christie's own life, a sensational disappearance that took place.
A brilliant, world-famous author of detective fiction, vanishing into the night without a trace. In 1926, Agatha Christie, the queen of mystery herself, disappeared under circumstances so baffling that even her most cunning fictional detective, Hercule Poirot, would have struggled to piece together the clues. The disappearance captured the attention of a nation, ignited a media frenzy, and left behind a trail of speculation, secrets, and theories. For years, the mystery remained unsolved. However, now officials claim, after nearly 100 years, that Agatha Christie's disappearance has finally been solved. Let's start from the very beginning. The life of Agatha Christie. Born on September 15, 1890, in the seaside town of Torquay, Devon, England, Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller was the youngest child of Frederick Alva Miller, a wealthy American stockbroker, and his English wife, Clara Boehmer. She grew up in a comfortable upper-middle-class home known as Ashfield. Clara, a somewhat eccentric figure, believed children should not learn to read until they were 8, fearing it would strain their minds too soon. Yet Agatha, ever curious and independent, defied this odd rule and taught herself to read by the age of 5, quietly devouring books in secret. Agatha's family life was an odd mix of Victorian restraint and whimsy. Her father, Frederick, a man of leisure with a relaxed outlook on life, doted on her but was plagued by financial instability and health issues. When he died in 1901, Agatha was just 11 years old. It was a loss that deeply affected Agatha, leaving a void she would later explore through themes of loss and betrayal in her novels. Her mother, Clara, while loving, remained a strong and sometimes unconventional presence, encouraging Agatha's vivid imagination yet imposing restrictions on more formal education. Agatha's schooling was sporadic, consisting mostly of home tutoring and a brief stint in Paris, where she studied music and voice. Her experiences in France, combined with her upbringing in the quiet English countryside, cultivated a sense of contrast and curiosity that would later influence her work. However, Agatha's path to literary fame was not straightforward. In her early 20s, she dabbled in writing poetry and short stories, often submitting them for publication with little success. It wasn't until she was challenged by her sister, Madge, to write a detective novel that she truly found her voice as an author. This challenge would lead to her first book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, published in 1920. The novel introduced the world to Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective whose little gray cells and fastidious nature would become iconic. Yet long before her literary breakthrough, Agatha's life took a dramatic turn in 1912 when she met Archibald "Archie" Christie, a young and dashing Royal Flying Corps officer. They met at a dance, and though her mother warned Agatha that Archie might not be a faithful partner, the headstrong young woman was swept off her feet by his charm and adventurous spirit. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of a world on the brink of war. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Agatha and Archie married on Christmas Eve of that year, in a modest ceremony held at Emmanuel Church in Clifton, Bristol. While Archie was deployed to France, Agatha took up volunteer work, serving as a nurse at the Red Cross Hospital in Torquay. It was during her time in the hospital's dispensary, working with medicines and learning the intricacies of poisons, that she developed a fascination with toxic substances. Later on, she used these details in her murder plots. In a letter to a friend, Agatha once remarked, "There is a fascination in poisons. They are subtle, silent, and deadly. They hold a power that is almost hypnotic." In 1919, the couple welcomed their only child, Rosalind Margaret Clarissa, into the world. Yet, even as Agatha's domestic life seemed to flourish, cracks began to show. Archie, an ambitious man with an interest in golf and the outdoors, often appeared distant and emotionally unavailable. Clara's earlier warnings about his potential for infidelity cast a long shadow over Agatha's marriage, a fear that would later come to a head in 1926 when Archie confessed to an affair with Nancy Neal, a family friend. This betrayal would trigger one of the most infamous episodes in Agatha's life, her 11-day disappearance. This mystery rivals any of her own plots and fuels endless speculation. Yet long before that infamous vanishing act, Agatha had already demonstrated a remarkable talent for storytelling. Rise to fame as an author. It all began in 1916, during the dreary backdrop of the First World War, when Agatha, then a nurse at the Red Cross Hospital in Torquay, found herself in the company of medicine bottles and poison charts. The world around her was filled with the uncertainty of war, and she, like many women of her generation, was thrown into a situation where traditional roles were upended. It was in this setting that Agatha's older sister, Madge, challenged her to write a detective story, remarking, "You've always been so clever at making up stories. You should write one with a twist." That casual bet would become a spark that ignited a literary phenomenon. Agatha took the challenge seriously. She drew inspiration from her surroundings, the quiet, genteel world of the English countryside, the rigid social structures, and the hidden undercurrents of deceit and betrayal. Her experiences in the dispensary, where she prepared medications for injured soldiers, fed her fascination with poisons. The result of this challenge was The Mysterious Affair at Styles, completed in 1916 but left unpublished for years. In this debut novel, Agatha introduced Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective with an egg-shaped head, precise mustache, and a penchant for order and symmetry. Poirot was partly inspired by the influx of Belgian refugees in England during the war, as well as by Agatha's interest in the psychology of outsiders in closed communities. The story unfolded within the stately confines of Styles Court, a quintessential English country estate, and revolved around the poisoning of Emily Inglethorpe, a wealthy widow whose murder shattered the veneer of respectability in the household. Poirot's brilliance lay in his ability to uncover the psychological motives behind seemingly mundane details, a perspective that set him apart from the hard-boiled detectives emerging in American fiction. But Agatha's manuscript did not find a home easily. She faced a string of rejections from 6 publishers in total. One editor dismissed it as too far-fetched, while another claimed detective fiction had no future in the post-war world. Yet, Agatha refused to be discouraged. Finally, in 1920, John Lane of the Bodley Head accepted The Mysterious Affair at Styles for publication, signing Agatha to a contract that included a modest advance and a commitment for additional books. It was the beginning of a long and sometimes fraught relationship. Lane, a shrewd businessman, undervalued Agatha's early work, locking her into a contract that would later frustrate her as her fame grew. Still, this contract opened the door for her to become a published author, and for Poirot to make his debut on the literary stage. Upon its release, The Mysterious Affair at Styles was met with a warm, if cautious, reception. Critics praised the novel's clever plotting and Poirot's unique character, though few anticipated the global phenomenon it would become. The Times literary supplement commended Agatha's convoluted but logical plot, while The Sketch described Poirot as a curious little man whose mind is as sharp as his mustache. Historian Gillian Gill, in her analysis of Christie's early works, argues that Poirot's enduring appeal lies in his ability to bridge the gap between the traditional detective and the modern forensic analyst. He is both an outsider and a mirror to the reader's own suspicions, embodying the anxiety of post-war Britain, where old certainties had been shattered. As Poirot's popularity grew, Agatha continued to refine her craft. Her understanding of pacing, character psychology, and the art of misdirection became more sophisticated with each novel. She once said, "Plots come to me suddenly, with the most extraordinary rush. I can't explain it, but I know when it happens. It's like the whole story writes itself in my head, and I only have to put it down." This gift for plot architecture became her hallmark. Poirot, in particular, became an iconic figure, his image immortalized in film, television, and stage adaptations. From his first appearance in 1920 to his final case in Curtain, written during the Second World War but published in 1975, Poirot embodied a blend of logic, civility, and a touch of vanity that made him a beloved character worldwide. Agatha's creation of such a distinctive and enduring detective was not merely a matter of luck, but a reflection of her ability to tap into the collective imagination of a society seeking order amidst chaos. Historian Laura Thompson describes Poirot as the archetype of the outsider detective, solving English crimes while remaining slightly apart from English society. His success is, in part, Christie's commentary on the contradictions of the very world she writes about. By the mid-1920s, Agatha had firmly established herself as a major literary figure. Yet fame did not come without challenges and personal struggles. Agatha Christie's journey as the Queen of Crime was not without profound personal struggles. In the spring of 1926, Agatha's world was shaken by the death of her beloved mother, Clara Miller, at the family home Ashfield in Torquay. Clara had been Agatha's rock, her confidant, and a source of deep comfort throughout her life. The loss devastated Agatha, and she found herself engulfed in a profound grief that left her emotionally and creatively paralyzed. "I felt as though a lamp had gone out inside me," she later wrote, describing the hollowness that followed Clara's passing. This overwhelming grief was compounded by the responsibility of sorting through her mother's estate and belongings, a task that, by Agatha's own admission, felt like dissecting the very fabric of my own past. Adding to her anguish was the unraveling of her marriage to Archibald "Archie" Christie. Despite having built a seemingly stable life together, with their only daughter, Rosalind, born in 1918, Agatha had long harbored quiet anxieties about Archie's loyalty. Her mother, in particular, had warned her years earlier that Archie might not remain faithful, a foreboding prediction that Agatha tried to dismiss. Yet Clara's words proved tragically prophetic. That same year, Archie confessed to having fallen in love with another woman, a younger, vivacious woman named Nancy Neal, whom he had met at a social event. The revelation shattered Agatha's sense of security. Archie's affair was not just a personal betrayal, it was a public humiliation, as whispers of the affair circulated among their friends and acquaintances. The image of the happy Christie household, so carefully maintained, was crumbling, and Agatha found herself isolated in her grief. Her self-worth eroded by the double blow of losing her mother and her husband. As historian Laura Thompson observes, Agatha's genius lay in creating plots where all seemed orderly on the surface, yet chaos and darkness lurked beneath. In 1926, her own life mirrored this very motif. Outwardly the successful author, inwardly a woman on the brink of collapse. Or rather, the sudden inability to work. For a woman whose mind had always been alive with stories, characters, and intricate plots. The writer's block that gripped her after Clara's death and Archie's confession was particularly devastating. For months, she struggled to write, unable to summon the clarity or focus that had previously come so easily. She described feeling like a hollow shell, going through the motions of life without any real sense of purpose or joy. Even the act of caring for Rosalind, her young daughter, became an effort of sheer will as Agatha battled the suffocating weight of depression. In December 1926, the emotional turmoil reached its breaking point in the now infamous episode of Agatha's disappearance. The Disappearance. On the cold evening of December 3, 1926, after putting her 9-year-old daughter, Rosalind, to bed, Agatha quietly packed a small attaché case, slipped out of her home in Sunningdale, Berkshire, and drove away into the night. That night, the celebrated author of The Mysterious Affair at Styles and creator of the beloved detective Hercule Poirot vanished without a trace. Agatha's abandoned car was discovered the next morning at the edge of a remote quarry at Newlands Corner, near Guildford, just a few miles from her home. The vehicle was parked haphazardly, with the engine still running and the headlights on. Inside the car lay personal belongings, a fur coat, a driving license, and an expired petrol ration card. Yet no sign of Agatha herself. The scene baffled authorities and fueled rampant speculation. Was this a case of foul play, an attempt at self-harm, or something far stranger? News of Agatha Christie's vanishing spread quickly, captivating newspapers across Britain and soon the world. Headlines screamed of the great disappearance, and public fascination soared. Here was a woman who had spun countless tales of murder, deceit, and disappearances, and now she had seemingly become the protagonist of her own baffling thriller. The irony was not lost on the public or the press, which eagerly followed every lead and theory. The official search efforts were immediate and unprecedented for the time. Local police, initially baffled, coordinated with neighboring forces, mobilizing over 1,000 constables. Volunteers, nearly 20,000 strong, joined the hunt, scouring the English countryside, railway stations, and even riverbanks. Airplanes, a novel technology then, were employed in early aerial searches over wooded areas and moors. Among the more unusual tactics employed was the use of Agatha's own family dog, Peter, who was brought to various search sites in the hope he could pick up her scent. Desperate for clues, police also delved into Agatha's manuscripts and personal writings, speculating that her stories might contain hidden messages or hints about her whereabouts. Some investigators even resorted to seances and spiritualists. The investigation briefly stalled when a letter arrived, purportedly from Agatha herself, sent to her brother-in-law, Archibald's brother, in which she claimed to be staying at a spa in Harrogate, Yorkshire. The letter offered a tantalizing but ultimately unconvincing lead. Police initially paused the search, hoping she might be safely recuperating, but skepticism quickly grew. The tone of the letter seemed out of character for Agatha, and investigators suspected it was a forgery, perhaps intended to mislead or calm the public. Once doubts were confirmed, the search resumed in earnest, but no trace was found in Yorkshire or anywhere else. Historians and biographers have long debated the cause of Agatha's disappearance. Some, like the respected biographer Janet Morgan, suggest that the event was a result of acute psychological distress, a temporary breakdown triggered by the compounded pressures of personal loss and marital betrayal. Morgan notes that the disappearance reflected a woman overwhelmed by grief, loss, and a profound sense of dislocation. Others speculate that Agatha may have sought a dramatic escape from her troubles. In any case, Agatha checked into the Swan Hydropathic Hotel in Harrogate under the name Teresa Neal, the surname of her husband's mistress, though it is unclear whether this was deliberate. Scholars like Jared Cade argue that the use of this surname symbolized a collision of betrayal, identity, and despair. Despite the extensive efforts, no definitive explanation or resolution ever emerged. Agatha Christie eventually reappeared on December 14, 1926, staying at a hotel in Harrogate, and claimed to have suffered from amnesia, unable to recall the events of the previous 11 days. The incident was quietly buried in the years following, overshadowed by Agatha's literary achievements and her later, more conventional life. However, in the aftermath of Agatha Christie's bewildering disappearance in December 1926, a series of developments both deepened the mystery and cast shadows of suspicion, particularly around her husband, Archibald Christie. Among the most intriguing revelations were the discovery of 3 letters, each addressed to key individuals in Agatha's life, which became focal points in the unraveling of this real-life enigma. The letters, found by the police and close associates during the frantic search and investigation, were scrutinized for clues, but instead raised more questions than answers. One letter was sent to Agatha's brother-in-law, James Watts, reassuring him that she was safe and recuperating at a spa in Yorkshire. The tone was polite, almost perfunctory, yet the timing and content seemed strangely detached from the urgency and concern that surrounded her disappearance. Another letter was addressed to her secretary, containing mundane details about Agatha's schedule and instructions regarding her work, an oddly normal communication that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary circumstances. However, it was the 3rd letter, sent directly to her husband Archie, that became a source of controversy and speculation. According to accounts from contemporaries and later biographers such as Janet Morgan and Laura Thompson, Archie refused to allow the police or the public to see the letter. He told investigators that the letter contained nothing of significance and eventually burned it. Some speculated that the letter might have contained confessions, explanations, or information that could implicate him in some way, while others believed Archie's actions were simply an attempt to protect his privacy or that of his wife. The refusal to share this critical piece of correspondence gave rise to theories that Archie may have had a more direct role in Agatha's disappearance, or at the very least, knowledge of her plans that he chose to conceal. His behavior, combined with the public knowledge of his affair with Nancy Neal, led many to question whether his infidelity and the strain on their marriage contributed to Agatha's emotional crisis. Historian Jared Cade, who has extensively studied the case, suggests that Archie's actions cast a shadow that lingers to this day, noting that the line between spouse, suspect, and protector became blurred in the court of public opinion. Suspicion was further exacerbated by reports that Archie seemed unusually calm and composed throughout the investigation. Some commentators at the time, and even some police officers, found this suspicious, speculating that he may have had something to hide. Others have since argued that Archie's behavior could be interpreted as stoicism or shock, a natural response to the complex and painful situation. Scholars and enthusiasts alike debate whether the event was a carefully planned act of escape, a psychological breakdown, or a more sinister plot. Biographer Laura Thompson aptly summarizes this enduring enigma. The case is not just about a woman who vanished. It is about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of loss, betrayal, and the fragility beneath a polished exterior. Despite public pressure, Agatha was famously reticent about discussing the incident. She provided very little information, and her statements were often vague and contradictory. At times, she claimed to suffer from amnesia, a psychological defense that some contemporary psychiatrists accept as a genuine phenomenon under extreme stress, while others viewed it skeptically. This silence gave rise to a multitude of theories surrounding her disappearance. Some suggest it was a calculated act of escape from a troubled marriage and the pressures of fame, a way for Agatha to reclaim control in a world where her personal life was unraveling. Others propose it was an emotional breakdown exacerbated by grief over her mother's death and the betrayal by her husband. A more sensational theory even posits that the entire episode was a publicity stunt, designed to enhance her mystique and boost book sales. Let's take a look at these theories one by one and see if the facts fit the picture. Theory number 1. Publicity stunt. One of the most enduring and controversial explanations for Agatha Christie's disappearance is the theory that it was a calculated publicity stunt, designed to boost the sales of her then recently published novel, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. The novel in question, published earlier in 1926, was indeed a pivotal book in Christie's career, hailed as a masterpiece of the detective genre and lauded for its innovative and shocking ending. Sales were strong, and the book secured Christie's position as a leading figure in crime fiction. Critics of the publicity stunt theory argue that the success of the novel and Christie's growing reputation made such a scheme unnecessary. As literary historian Margaret Lane notes, Christie's genius was already recognized. Her reputation did not require the sensationalism of a staged disappearance. The novel's acclaim alone was sufficient to ensure a lasting legacy, reducing the practical incentive to risk personal reputation with a risky stunt. Adding weight to this skepticism is the statement from Christie's secretary, Mrs. Elizabeth Betty Lee, who flatly rejected the notion that her employer had any hand in manufacturing the disappearance. Lee, who worked closely with Christie for years, emphasized her employer's modesty and reserved nature. Agatha was never one for theatrics or self-promotion, Lee reportedly said in later interviews. She hated fuss and avoided the limelight. The very thought of using such a desperate act to gain attention was simply out of character. However, proponents of the publicity stunt theory have raised a number of compelling counterpoints that invite reconsideration. First, they note the possibility that Christie might have instructed her secretary and close associates to deny any involvement in a public relations scheme, either out of embarrassment or as part of the plot's cover-up. The art of misdirection was, after all, something Christie excelled at in her writing, and it is argued that she might have applied the same craft to real life. Literary critic James Sutherland writes, "If anyone could stage the perfect disappearance and maintain plausible deniability, it was Agatha Christie herself. Her storytelling skills extended beyond the page." Moreover, supporters of the theory point out that fame, even for successful authors, is never guaranteed to endure without continual public engagement. Christie might have felt the pressure of securing her place in literary history beyond one or two best-selling novels. The cultural landscape of the 1920s was evolving, and the rapid rise of celebrity culture meant that public figures often leveraged personal drama to sustain attention. Christie may have seen the disappearance as a dramatic gambit to cement her name forever in the public consciousness. Yet, the debate over Christie's true feelings toward publicity remains unresolved. On one hand, many historians emphasize her well-documented dislike for excessive attention and her preference for privacy. Biographer Laura Thompson writes, "Christie was a private woman who recoiled from fame's invasive glare. To stage such a public and scandalous event seems antithetical to her nature." On the other hand, some commentators argue that people are complex and under extreme emotional pressure, such as the grief over her mother's death and the betrayal by her husband. Christie might have taken extraordinary steps that contradicted her usual character. Theory number 2. Revenge against her husband. Another possibility is that the whole thing was a calculated act of revenge against her husband, Archibald "Archie" Christie. The author's car was found abandoned near Silent Pool, a quarry in Surrey, not far from where Archie was purportedly spending time with Nancy Neal. This geographical detail is critical, as it suggests that Christie may have chosen the location deliberately. Literary historian Jared Cade, who has extensively researched Christie's life and disappearance, is one of the leading proponents of this theory. In his book Agatha Christie and the 12 Lives, Cade argues that Christie's disappearance was not a moment of emotional collapse, but an elaborate and calculated plan, devised to publicly humiliate Archie and confront the infidelity that had shattered her marriage. Central to Cade's argument is the role of Christie's sister-in-law, Nan Watts. Family documents, along with testimony from Nan's daughter Barbara Watts, provide a fascinating insight into the events that followed Christie's disappearance. According to these sources, Christie made her way to London shortly after abandoning her car and stayed with Nan Watts, who provided support during the crisis. Nan, deeply sympathetic to Christie's plight, is said to have helped fund Christie's subsequent stay in Harrogate, Yorkshire, where Christie was later found at the Harrogate Hydro Spa Hotel. This assistance from within the family points to a carefully planned escape rather than a spontaneous flight. Barbara Watts recalled in interviews decades later that her mother was distraught over the state of Archie's marriage and had promised to help Agatha if ever she needed it. The extent of this familial involvement, supported by letters and private accounts, lends credence to the idea that Christie's disappearance was no mere accident, but part of a wider, coordinated response to her husband's betrayal. Cade writes, "The pieces fall into place. The location of the car, the timing, and the covert shelter in London all indicate a woman staging a drama to expose and shame her husband." However, while the revenge theory is compelling, it also raises questions about its plausibility given Christie's reserved and private nature. Critics of the revenge theory also point out that the logistics of such an elaborate scheme would have been difficult to execute without attracting suspicion or unraveling prematurely. The secrecy required, the involvement of family members, and the need to maintain the ruse for nearly 11 days all suggest a level of planning and resolve that some argue was inconsistent with Christie's known personality. Historian Richard Davenport Hines notes, "The idea that Christie, a woman who valued privacy and order, could mastermind such a high-stakes drama strains credulity. Yet, the emotional turmoil she faced was immense, so the possibility remains open." Moreover, the theory does not fully explain Christie's silence after her return. Theory number 3. Amnesia and mental health crisis. Agatha Christie's own explanation of her disappearance, revealed in a rare and candid interview with the Daily Mail in February 1928, provides a deeply personal and haunting glimpse into what may have been an intense mental health crisis compounded by physical trauma. In her only public commentary on the subject, Christie described a period of intense emotional turmoil in the months leading up to her disappearance. She spoke openly of suffering from insomnia and depression, a confession that was remarkable given the era's stigmatization of mental illness, especially for a public figure. Christie told the interviewer that while driving on the night she vanished, she experienced a sudden and overwhelming impulse to end it all. It was only the thought of her young daughter, Rosalind, that stopped her. She recounted how she began driving aimlessly, as if in a trance, with no clear destination or memory of where she was going. This aimlessness culminated in a car accident when she crashed her vehicle and sustained a head injury. It was this injury, Christie claimed, that led to partial amnesia, wiping her memory of who she was and how she had come to be there. Her account includes vague memories of arriving at Waterloo Station in London, dirty and injured, yet unrecognized by anyone despite the extensive nationwide search that was underway. Christie's physical appearance, muddy, bruised, and disheveled, should have made her easy to spot, but instead, she wandered unnoticed through crowds. Eventually, Christie ended up in Harrogate, a spa town in Yorkshire, where she checked into the Hydro Hotel under the false name Mrs. Tessa Neal, identifying herself as a South African woman. While residing there, she displayed calmness and contentment, reflecting a deep nostalgia for the lost time and a temporary relief from her emotional suffering. However, Christie's explanation raises as many questions as it answers. How could such a well-known public figure go completely unrecognized during one of the most intensive manhunts in British history? Over 1,000 police officers, 15,000 volunteers, and even early airplane searches scoured the countryside and cities. Yet Christie's presence in Harrogate went unnoticed for 10 days. Historian Elizabeth Wilson notes, "The idea that someone of Christie's stature could vanish into anonymity so thoroughly strains belief, but it also reveals much about social attitudes at the time. British stoicism, respect for privacy, and the reluctance to interfere may have all contributed to this peculiar invisibility. Psychologists have long debated Agatha Christie's account of her disappearance, with some, like Dr. Helen Marshall, suggesting her trauma and head injury could have triggered dissociative amnesia, a mental escape from the unbearable pain of grief and betrayal. Marshall argues that assuming the identity of Mrs. Tessa Neal may have been her brain's way of coping with trauma, while critics like Laura Thompson highlight inconsistencies in Christie's story, especially the selective nature of her memory loss, and question why she never openly discussed the event afterward. Despite these uncertainties, the theory of an amnesia-driven mental health crisis is seen as a psychologically compassionate explanation, humanizing Christie as a woman overwhelmed by personal turmoil. In any case, so far, this is the most consistent explanation of all. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.